Hello all, welcome to oratrainers.com. In this Oracle database programming session, we'll discuss about PLSQL trigger. Let us get into the agenda. After completing this session, we should be able to understand what are the different types of triggers are there and how we can use a trigger, what is the use of it, and how do we create it, and what are the firing rules like when the trigger gets fired, and how do you drop a trigger. Okay, so let us get into the first slide. What are the types of triggers? Okay, and also what is a trigger? So a trigger is a PLSQL block and that is associated with a table, view, a schema, or the database. Okay, it executes implicitly whenever a particular event takes place. So what do you mean by trigger? So so basic thing is like how do you create a trigger or how does a trigger look like? It's a PLSQL code or a PLSQL block or a PLSQL procedure, and you can create a trigger on a particular set of components. It can be a table, view, or a schema, or at the database level. Okay, four levels. And how it gets fired. So for a trigger to occur, like you cannot you cannot invoke a trigger manually. Let us say like the way we execute a function or the way we execute a PLSQL query, or sorry, SQL query or a PLSQL procedure, we cannot call the trigger directly. And whenever the event occurs, based on the event occurrence, the trigger will get fired. Okay, like generally like whenever like what do you call, when the fuse gets off in the office, right? Like in the house or office, at what point of time, whenever like whenever the current gets shocked, automatically the fuse gets off, right? Or let us say like you'll get a signal in the you'll get an indicator saying that like if the fuel is less than 15%, you'll get an indicator, right? Something like that. So whenever the event gets placed, the trigger will get fired based on the triggering rules which you mentioned, like based on what triggering limit, right? Let us even simple example is alarm. So on what basis, whenever the time reaches 7 o'clock, the alarm gets fired based on the triggering action which you mentioned in your alarm clock. Okay, and now coming to other thing, there are two types of triggers. Okay, one we call it as DML trigger, other one is non DML trigger. Okay, you may find a different set of names, but like try to understand from the technical point of view rather than just a definition of what is the difference kind of thing. Okay, so but broadly they are divided into two categories. One is DML trigger, other one is non DML trigger. What is DML trigger? DML trigger generally gets fired whenever you create any DML statement. Let us say whenever you want to fire a trigger based on a DML event. It can be insert, update, or delete. Based on those particular events, you can create a trigger. Other one is non-DML trigger. So this basically occurs whenever let us say whenever any create object occurs or DDL event occurs or any database event occurs, you can create trigger on these particular set of events. So basically these are based on the event, you have a different set types of triggers. Okay, now let's get into the first one, the DML trigger. Okay, so what is a DML statement in a database? It can be insert, update, and delete, right? So let us see the total set of DML, like information or the triggering. How does a trigger block look like, right? So trigger statements look like. So we have set of definitions or a set of like functionality to be considered whenever you want to create a trigger, right? Like it can be a timing, nothing but for which table or for view, right? So DML, you can perform DML statements on a table or a view. Okay, now so the timing, when you say timing in the trigger, it means like for which particular component, whether you want to consider a trigger for the table or a view. Okay, other one is the event. So like whether you want to consider the event for the which set of DML operation on which object, it can be a table or a view. Other one is a trigger type, whether you want to fire the trigger on a row level or a statement level. So row level means like let us say whenever you are trying to assume that you're performing an update statement. So when you fire an update statement, it can update a single row, multiple row, right? If you want to consider the logic for each row updation, you can have a row level logic. Or if you want to just consider only like for total execution of your update statement, you want to fire a trigger only once, then you can consider statement level trigger. When clause is about like whether you want to fire it, whether you want to perform a logic in the trigger based on which particular condition. Triggering body is the actual business logic, the similar to our PLSQL begin block, right? Whatever you write, right, that should be mentioned in the trigger body. Okay, the major business logic will be mentioned in the triggering body. Let us say all the event. Let us say you want to consider whenever any updation of an employee record occurs, what do you want to perform, right? That you can mention the triggering body. Okay. Now some more information. So what is the timing we mentioned? When the timing can be before, after, right? Like before performing an update or after performing an update. That is what it means. Or instead of is it is it is used only for the purpose of whenever you have a views. Okay. And user event, triggering user event can be like during insertion, update, or deletion. Okay. Now statement trigger, just now we discussed. Statement is like the trigger will get fired only once for each statement level. Row means like for each row it will get fired. That's the difference. Okay. Now what do you write in the triggering body, right? The PLSQL logic. So it all depends upon how you want to evaluate. So it's a PLSQL body. So obviously you can call SQL query, you can call any PLSQL procedure, you can call any PLSQL function. Okay. Now coming to the next slide. Yeah. So let us see very simple example here. Here, if you observe, or maybe let us discuss the syntax first. Okay. Now here, if you observe what we mentioned, create or replace. Okay. Trigger, the keyword, the trigger name, user defined trigger name, timing. Okay. Event, on which table, and the PLSQL business logic, a trigger body, I can say. Okay. Now, so in this example, what are we trying to do is, let us say I have a table called EMP. So whenever you're trying to insert a record on the EMP, if the database user who is executing the insertion, if the user is not Scott, okay, if the username is not Scott, then raise an error saying that like this user is like kind of some custom issue, right? Custom application error, not a valid user. Okay, you just want to consider this logic. So now here, if you observe, whenever I insert, whenever I'm trying to perform this action like insert into EMP, so what is happening? This particular trigger is getting raised. It's saying that like you will get this kind of error, like it's not a valid user. And also it mentioned the Oracle application number. Okay, and at which line you got this issue. Okay, now let us see how do we execute this one. Okay, so I'll just copy this logic. Okay, now how do you write the query? How do you write the trigger? It's similar to the way we write PLSQL procedure or a function, right? Just copy paste this code, whatever I mentioned here. So what I can do is I'll just save it. You can have a different name if at all, if you want to check it. So I'll just say check user dot SQL. You can mention this one. Okay. Now I don't have the Scott schema. What I have is either I have HR schema, okay, or app schema. Okay. Now let us say in my case it is a Scott schema, right? So if I anyway let us see. Okay, I'll just execute this one. This trigger got compiled. So here if you observe, it says trigger got compiled, not executed. It will not execute. Okay, is your PLSQL component just got compiled. Okay, now I'll just copy this trigger name. Let us see the information from the object level also, so that will get clarity. Select star from all underscore object. Here object name is equal to, okay, as we know that like any of the metadata object, it should be always in uppercase. So just make use of this one and just mention, yeah. So this trigger got just created now. Okay. Now let us try to insert the record, right? Let us try to insert the record into this EMP and just see what is the error, how it raises. So I'll just perform the same statement. Okay, now what it's telling, error during execution of trigger. Okay, and it says the error, this one. Okay, so this is how it happens. So this is how you can raise a error battle. You can raise a, like you can just have one more check of the logic, like whether if some other user is trying to insert the data into a table, you can raise a error like this. Okay, now coming to the next sample. So here what we have done is we just consider some more extra condition. What we mentioned here, create or replace a trigger, department trigger, before insert or update or delete on a particular table. So like I just want to consider whenever there is any change happening on a particular table, I want to make sure that like a user should not be updating a particular data, or you should not be removing a data. So I just want to consider this logic. So what I've done here is, if user is trying to insert or update the data on a particular non-business day, I don't want to allow them, right? So you can, sorry, so here if you observe what I'm doing, if the current date is either in Saturday or Sunday, okay, you can insert data in business days only. Okay, so nothing but we are trying to perform the updation only on the business days. Okay, remaining days we don't want to allow these to update. And other one for deletion, what I'm doing is, you should not delete the data on the non-business day. You cannot delete data on, you cannot delete data on business day. Nothing but, let us say if user is trying to delete the data on Monday or a Tuesday or something, we are not allowing them to perform it. So like based on the business logic, and you can use these all particular predicates to execute, consider those logic, right? Whether you want to allow particular data to be performed on a particular business day or non-business day, right? Now coming to the next one, row level trigger. So now here if you observe what we mentioned, it is almost similar to the existing logic only. Like earlier what we have done for the check user, we have just designed a very simple trigger here. We just mentioned create or replace trigger before insert, that's it. That's the logic we mentioned. But here if you consider what we mentioned, create or replace trigger, the timing, and also we mentioned the event. And also like if at all if you want to consider the old data, new data, you can mention. And then for each row on which condition, okay, old refers to, let us say when you're trying to perform the updation, you can get the old value using old dot your particular column value, new dot you'll get a new value, that you can get it in the row triggers. Now just see this example, then we can get more clarity. 1 minute. Yeah, this one. So what we're trying to do is, in this one, I just created a table called EMP audit table. So create a replace trigger after delete or insert or update. Nothing but whenever you're performing any DML operation in this particular table, I just want to insert data into this particular audit table. So if you observe in many of the banking system, banking applications, or like the human related application, like HCM specific resource management applications, what happens is they always have a good amount of auditing functionality, because they want to know what is updated, when it was updated, and what is the old value as well as what is the new value also. This is generally taken considered in many of the banking applications as well as the HRMS application. If you are from the HRMS background, if you see the per people all F, right? So you always have a functionality, whether like whenever you are updating a record, what will happen is the existing record will be invalidated and new record will be created, and you can get the old value as well as new value information also from that. Even some some ERP application, what they want is custom bolt-on application will be designed to consider this information. Nothing but, let us say, like you're changing a particular column in a supplier, and you want to know like what was the old value and what is the new value. So you can have a trigger functionality considering like which value was changed. You can have a column name, and you can have a new value as well as old value also. By using this auditing functionality, you can like you can achieve those particular things, right? So now let us see this one. So I'll just copy this one. Okay, so I'll copy the table is already there, I hope. Let me check it. Select star from EMP audit table. Yeah, it is there. So I'll delete the data, delete from EMP audit table, right? Data got deleted, commit. Now I'll just create a trigger. So I'll save it. Okay, now and here I mentioned set a define off. If you see the first statement, set define off. Why? Because like generally whenever you have this particular colons, it will consider them as a bind parameter. SQL developer does not recognize it will not recognize it as a PLSQL code. It will recognize them as a band parameter. You need to enter the value if you don't mention that. Okay, that is why I mentioned the set define off as a first statement. Just compile this one. And yeah, you can also mention show error at the last line, and you just mention slash as well as after that you mention show error. What will happen is sometimes like let us yeah, you may not clearly understand what is the issue. Like it just says like compilation failed, but you'll not understand what is the issue. In those scenarios, better to have show errors so that you can easily trace out. Or I can show you right away. Let us say I just mentioned some error here. I'll just comment this one. Now try to compile and see what happens. So now it just says warning. Okay, now it just says warning. By this, how can I understand what is the issue? It just completed with warning now. And also one more important thing, whenever you are trying to create a trigger, if it is an invalid state, what will happen is you cannot perform any operation on your table. So now here I mentioned I created a table on this EMP table, but this trigger was invalid. Now let us see what will happen if you try to execute your EMP table. Okay, select is working. Now let us say I'll just mention delete from EMP. Okay, now you got the error, right? Now you got the error, right? So this is what happens. So always be careful whenever you are creating a trigger. If your create is success, if your particular trigger is success, that is good. If your trigger is not valid, make sure that you better you disable it or drop the invalid trigger. Okay, else what will happen is your insertion will not happen. So in this kind of scenario, if at all, if you want to know the error, what you have to do, just execute the show error. Now it will give you some information. By this, you can easily trace out, okay, what happened, like why you got there and all those things. Okay. Now just mention this one. Okay. Now the trigger got compiled. Now let us get out, like let us consider our ordering functionality. So now what we have done, so as per this logic, whenever there is an update insert on this table, a log should be, a record should be inserted in this table, right? Now I'll just remove this one. Let us say I check the data first, check the data first. Now I want to change the salary for the employee 100. Update EMP salary is equal to 10,000, where EMPN is equal to 100. Okay. Now what happened? One row got updated, and just see the data from the this table, EMP audit table. Okay. Can you see? Okay. So we got 3 records because I have not committed, I guess. Let me just do it again. Okay. Delete from EMP table. I'll commit it and just see the data first here. That's fine. Check the data in the audit table. No data now, right? Let me execute now. Okay. Clear the log. Check the audit table now. Okay. Now it says employee 100, employees 100, old salary is this one, new salary is this one. Maybe the salary was I would have mentioned the old as old and new as same. Let me change it so that to understand whether like whether you're getting the latest salary or not in this. Can you see? Old is this one and this one. Now here what is happening? Let us say we are trying to consider the updation on only one column, right? If at all, if you want to monitor on each and every column, what you can do is you can design your table such a way that you can have a column name here and column value like that, like a column name, old value, new value. Like you can design in a different way. So this is one of the very simple way to design ordering functionality on a particular column. Okay. Now, so here, what is the extra thing we have done is we just added a when condition, okay, for each row. And let us say you don't want to monitor the data of each and every employee. Let us say you want to monitor the data of only a particular department or a particular employee, right, or particular job level. Then you can mention when condition after the for each row. That's only a different thing in this particular sample. Now, getting to the next slide. So instead of trigger, as we discussed, instead of trigger is used for the purpose of DML operations on the views. Whenever you have a DML operation performed on the view, you can have this particular instead of trigger rather than the normal trigger. Okay. So create or replace trigger. So here we have to mention instead of event name on view name on which particular view. Okay. And you can also mention the reference, like you can have the different set of columns for each row and a triggering body. Okay. Now here, if you observe the example, create or replace trigger, this is trigger name instead of on which particular view for each row, and this is a business logic begin if inserting. Okay, if insertion is happening on this particular view, then just simply insert the data. And here if you want to get the new value or a old value, you can mention like this. If at all, if you want to get the new value, mention new dot a particular column name. If at all, if you want to get a old value, mention the colon old dot a particular value. Okay. Now coming to other important thing. So what is the difference between a trigger and a PLSQL block? So we know that what are the logic which you write in the trigger body? It's a PLSQL logic. But what is the difference? So the difference is trigger will be created with the create trigger concept, a create trigger syntax, and a procedure is created with the create procedure syntax. And the source code of the trigger is available in the user underscore triggers, and the source code of the procedure will be available in the user underscore source. Okay, and other important part, trigger you cannot invoke explicitly. That will get that can be invoked automatically only when an event occurs. For procedure, you can explicitly invoke it. Okay, and you cannot write any commit and save point and roll back in the triggers. Okay, and coming to the procedure, we can write it. Now coming to the next slide. Okay, yeah. So as you know, these are the PLC, like a trigger is a PLSQL object, and all obviously like Oracle provides set of functionality for you to, when you have functionality to create, obviously Oracle will allow you, provides a functionality to drop it or to manage it. Okay, you can enable a trigger, you can disable a trigger. Sometimes like there's a chance that if your trigger is not working properly, better you disable it right away. Okay, then later on you can check out what is the issue with that. And if at all if you want to drop a trigger, you can simply drop the trigger. And one important notice, let us say if your table is having a set of triggers, if a table is dropped, all the dependent triggers on the table simply will get dropped. Okay, now what is how the trigger was executing? So this is how it like it follows the set of steps. Okay, first of all it will consider the before logic, and then it will consider the before row logic, then the after row logic, then the DML statement, and the after statement triggers. Okay, so in this, it's a very simple example. Like we have update statement, create or replace trigger after update on. Okay, after update on employee for each row, right? So let us say if this particular statement is performing updation of as multiple records, what will happen? Like your insertion, this will insert for multiple set of records, right? For each row, let us say if you are inserting 10 employees, if you are inserting the data into 10 employees, and what will happen after update? It's an update statement, right? It's an update statement. Okay, then it will perform the insertion. Now coming to the next topic in our triggers, the non-DML triggers. So far we have just discussed about the DML triggers, like where your trigger will get fired whenever any DML event occurs. Coming to non-DML triggers, it occurs based on the DDL events as well as database events. Okay, so we know that triggering user event is create, alter, or drop of an object, or a logging on or logging off your database, or shutting down, or whatever you call it as other one. Another event is like whenever you have a grant access on this one. Now, so similar syntax but little bit different. Create or replace trigger name, and the timing you have to mention whether it's a database event on a database or schema, then the triggering body. So here if you observe the example, what we have done is we have just created a table called create like a logon details. Okay, and we have mentioned a logic here. What we're trying to do is I just want to consider like who is logging into my database as well as logging off, like at what point of time they are logging in and what point of time they are getting out, so that I can monitor like how much time they are utilizing the database, right? This is very simple trigger. Some like similar to like whenever you have in most of the offices you'll have a swipe in and swipe out, right? Like they'll monitor what is how much time a user has been user has been there, the developer has been there in the office premises, like a swipe in swipe out kind of concept. Now so I'll just create a trigger, log on details trigger, save it. Okay, just check out this table is already there, so I will just try to delete the data from this one. Yeah, so it seems like many of them has like a logged in and logged out, right? That's why it has shown that number of records. So I'll just see. Yeah, as of now there is nothing, right? Because I already logged into my database, right? Now what I'll do is I'll just log out. I'll just log out. How do you log out? Just simply disconnect. Don't shut down your system. I mean to say, don't shut down your database. Just log out. That is enough. Okay. I just want to log in as well as log out, not shutting down of the database. So I just logged in now. Just see. I should see one record. Okay. I also have a log off trigger. That is why like a log off also got fired. But I'll show you the log off logic also. Now let us. I'll try to log off again. I logged off. Okay. Now I'll just log in again, and I'll just get two records. One is for login, other one is log off. Can you see? One is for login, other one is log off. So this is how how I'm trying to get the log on or log off logic. It's very simple. So we have a trigger event after log on which one, on schema. After that, like once this particular event takes place, you can just perform your business logic. Now just see the information. I just, yeah, these are log off logic. What we have done, same table, only thing is we just mention what is action, log off, before log off on the schema. You cannot have after log off on the schema, right? After logging off the schema, how will trigger will get fired? Like when you perform log off, so it will not simply directly shut down, right? It will just validate, is there any triggers are there, is there any, like it has to do a graceful log of your database, right? It will validate whether you have any pending DML statement. It will just validate everything, and then only it will get actual log off. Okay, that is why our trigger is getting fired. And coming to the final topic, like why do we use it? What are the advantages? See, there are many advantages of the trigger. There are some scenarios like as I said you, like if you want to monitor the DML statements on a particular table. Let us say when somebody is trying to drop a particular important table, what do you want to do it? What is the exception you want to raise it? As well as in the simple example, we have just seen how much data your database has been utilized and how many times they are logging in and logging off, as well as how the database is getting updated on a particular important table, like the salary tables or a job tables or HRMS tables or a banking related transaction tables. They're very important, right? So those particular things. And like you can also, let us say, to maintain the auditing information, you can have it, you can maintain the data integrity. Let us say sometimes what will happen is you don't want to have a keys on your table. Rather than that, you want to validate, you want to validate a particular combination of data should not be inserted. Then you can have a trigger logic there, like a fire an exception saying that like this is not a valid value. Or if you're trying to delete the data on a particular day, mention that like on this particular days you cannot delete the data. Those kind of things you can mention like you can, those things you can mention the triggers, and that's a major benefit, right? Now what are the like what are the guidelines you have to follow when you are trying to design a triggers? So you should not that like always like whenever there is a need of the trigger, then only you have to do it. Don't try to create multiple triggers on a particular table. So make sure that you club the set of logics, set of events to be considered, rather than creating multiple triggers on a single table. Just make use of use the existing triggers, or club the set of events and then perform it. And also don't try to duplicate what existing functionality of the triggers which is already available by the like implicit functionality which already Oracle is providing. Okay, those things. And obviously like more usage of triggers, like let us if you are having larger number of triggers on your particular database table, obviously it will slow down your database execution on the particular table. Okay, and also management of the triggers is very difficult. And also whenever you have a invalid triggers, make sure that you either disable them or drop it. Don't keep them in a pending. Total your database, like I mean functionality on the data, functionality on that particular table, that may all the dependent objects will get failed. It's very difficult to find out the issue in that. Okay, now how do you manage it? So the following system privileges are required to manage trigger, right? You need to have appropriate privileges, then only you can like your trigger, like your particular schema can execute those particular triggers. Okay, now how can you view the trigger information? We have a set of database views using which you can get the triggering information, like a trigger information. You can get the source code, you can get the errors, like a user underscore errors for the compilation errors, because any PLSQL object, any error will be available in the user underscore errors. Similarly, and for the triggers, like source code will be available in the user underscore the like as I mentioned earlier, you'll have a different table for that, right? And coming to the user underscore object, like that all the object information in the database will be available in the user underscore object information. Okay, so coming to the final slide. So far we have seen the different types of triggers and the triggering events, and how do you create a trigger, how do you drop a trigger, how do you manage a trigger, as well as how do you disable a trigger, how do you enable a trigger. Okay, and also you can find out, let us say, if at all you want to check out how many triggers are there on your particular table, what you can do is just mention your table, press shift F4. Okay, if you're using to SQL developer, you can just mention the shift F4. It will open this particular window, or you can select from the connection navigator also. Click on the triggers. Okay, now yeah, so I have these number of triggers on my this table. Okay, and trigger type, trigger owner, and the event and the status. Okay, and from here you can mention, you can check out any of the options if at all, if you have it. Fine. Yeah, so thank you. This is all about triggers.